Detective Sarah Martinez sat alone in her cramped office on the third floor of the Orange County Police Department, surrounded by case files that had consumed her life for the past 6 months. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the photographs spread before her, crime scene images she'd memorized, witness statements that led nowhere, and one photo that broke her heart every single time she looked at it. 3-year-old Emma Chen. The picture had been taken at Emma's birthday party, just 2 weeks before everything fell apart. In it, the little girl wore a pink princess dress and a smile so bright it could light up the darkest room. Her dark eyes sparkled with joy as she reached for a slice of chocolate cake, her entire world still innocent and whole. Sarah picked up the second photograph, the one taken at the hospital on the night of the incident. Same child, different universe. Emma's eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. Her small body was rigid, wrapped in a blanket 3 times too big, and her mouth, which had been chattering excitedly about princesses and puppies just days before, was sealed shut. 6 months, 182 days of complete silence. Sarah had been a detective for 12 years, had worked homicides, gang violence, and cases that would make grown men cry. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the weight of this case. The night of August 15th had shattered more than just one family. It had shattered Emma's ability to speak, to express, to process the horror she'd witnessed while hiding under her grandmother's kitchen table. The medical reports were extensive. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, one of California's leading child trauma specialists, had examined Emma 17 times. Selective mutism triggered by severe psychological trauma, her report stated in clinical terms that couldn't capture the reality of a toddler who woke up screaming silently in the middle of the night. Patient exhibits signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociation, and acute anxiety. Prognosis for speech recovery: uncertain. Uncertain, that word haunted Sarah's dreams. She'd watched through one-way glass as therapists tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, sand tray therapy, EMDR. Emma would engage sometimes, moving toys or drawing pictures but never making a sound. Not a word, not a cry, not even a whimper. The silence was so profound it seemed to fill whatever room the child occupied, suffocating everyone who tried to reach her. Emma's grandmother, Michelle Chen, had aged a decade in 6 months. Sarah had seen it happen in real time during their weekly meetings. The vibrant 62-year-old woman who'd raised Emma since birth, after Emma's mother died in childbirth and her father disappeared, now moved like a ghost through her own life. The guilt consumed her. She'd been in the other room when it happened. She'd heard the sounds but couldn't get there fast enough. And now her granddaughter, her entire world, was trapped in a prison of silence. "She has to testify," David Kim had said during their meeting yesterday. The prosecutor was a good man, Sarah knew that. He genuinely cared about justice, but there was desperation in his voice now. "Without Emma's testimony, our case is circumstantial. His lawyers will tear it apart. He'll walk free, Sarah. You know he will." She did know. The defendant, she refused to even think his name, had an expensive legal team and a history of slipping through the justice system's cracks. There were witnesses to pieces of what happened, but Emma was the only one who'd seen everything. The only one who could put him at the scene during the critical minutes that would mean the difference between conviction and acquittal. Sarah leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. Tomorrow morning, they were scheduled to appear in courtroom 4B. Judge Patricia Holloway had granted them one final hearing to determine if Emma could possibly testify. The defense attorney, Marcus Wellington, was probably already preparing his arguments about incompetent witnesses and the trauma of forcing a mute child onto the stand. He wasn't wrong technically. How could they put Emma through that? But how could they not? Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Michelle Chen. "Emma had another nightmare. She's awake now, just staring at the wall. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm losing her, Sarah. I'm losing my baby girl." The detective's throat tightened. She typed back, "Tomorrow, something has to change tomorrow. I promise I won't stop fighting for her." But what could change? They tried everything. Every expert, every technique, every possible way to reach through the trauma and find the little girl who'd been buried alive inside her own mind. Emma was still in there. Sarah believed that with every fiber of her being. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses. Emma would reach for her grandmother's hand, or she'd watch the birds outside with something like interest in her eyes. But the words never came. Sarah gathered the files, preparing to head home for what she knew would be another sleepless night. As she stood, her eyes fell on one more photograph, the evidence photo from Emma's grandmother's house. In the corner of the image, barely visible under the kitchen table, was a stuffed animal, a golden retriever puppy that Emma had been clutching when the police arrived. Emma used to love dogs. A thought flickered in Sarah's mind, barely formed, almost too fragile to acknowledge. She'd heard something recently, read an article about courthouse facility dogs being used with traumatized witnesses. It seemed like a long shot, maybe even a desperate reach, but Sarah grabbed her laptop and started searching. Courthouse facility dogs, child witnesses, trauma-informed approaches. The research was limited but compelling. There were success stories, not many but some. Children who'd been able to testify with a trained dog by their side. Children who'd found their voices again. Her heart began to beat faster. This was it. This had to be it. She looked at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Too late to call anyone tonight. But tomorrow morning before that hearing, she'd talk to David Kim. They'd present this to Judge Holloway. They had to try. Because tomorrow, in courtroom 4B, either Emma would find her voice, or a dangerous man would walk free. And Sarah Martinez had never been good at accepting defeat. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and whispered into the darkness, "Hold on, Emma. Just hold on one more day." Tomorrow would change everything. Prosecutor David Kim arrived at the courthouse at 6:30 a.m., a full 2 hours before Judge Patricia Holloway's chambers officially opened. He'd been awake since 3 a.m., ever since Sarah Martinez's frantic phone call had pulled him from a restless sleep. Now he sat on the cold marble steps outside the judge's office, his briefcase clutched on his lap, rehearsing his pitch for the 100th time. This was insane. He knew it was insane, but insane was all they had left. The folder in his briefcase felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Inside were printed articles about courthouse facility dogs, academic studies on trauma-informed court procedures, case law from the handful of jurisdictions that had allowed such accommodations, and one particular story that had made Sarah cry when she'd read it to him over the phone. A case in Seattle, where a 5-year-old assault victim had testified successfully with a golden retriever named Justice by her side. David had been a prosecutor for 9 years. He'd won 83 cases and lost 12. Each loss haunted him, but this one, if they lost this one, would destroy him. Because Emma Chen wasn't just a case number. She was a little girl who'd already lost so much, and the justice system was her last hope for any kind of closure or safety. The elevator dinged at 7:15 a.m. David looked up to see Judge Patricia Holloway emerging, coffee in hand, surprise evident on her face when she spotted him sitting outside her office like a desperate law school graduate waiting for exam results. "Mr. Kim," she said, her voice carrying that stern quality that made attorneys think twice before speaking in her courtroom. "This is highly irregular." "I know, Your Honor." David stood quickly, nearly dropping his briefcase. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't critical. I need 15 minutes, please, before the hearing." Judge Holloway studied him for a long moment. She was 61 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen every trick, every manipulation, every desperate plea that attorneys could manufacture. She'd been on the bench for 22 years, and she'd built a reputation for being fair but uncompromising, compassionate but realistic. She unlocked her office door. 10 minutes, Mr. Kim, not 15. David followed her inside, his heart hammering against his ribs. The judge's chambers were exactly what he'd expected, floor-to-ceiling law books, framed diplomas from Georgetown Law, photographs of her grandchildren on the credenza. She set down her coffee, removed her coat, and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Talk." David opened his briefcase with shaking hands and pulled out the folder. "Your Honor, I know this sounds unconventional. If you're about to ask for another continuance, Mr. Kim, the answer is no. We've delayed this trial twice already. The defense has been remarkably patient, though I suspect it's because they know our case is weak without the child's testimony." "It's not about a continuance." David slid the folder across her immaculate desk. "It's about giving Emma Chen the support she needs to testify. Your Honor, I want to bring a courthouse facility dog into your courtroom." Judge Holloway's hand froze halfway to the folder. "A what?" "A specially trained dog that provides emotional support to traumatized witnesses, particularly children. Please just look at the research." David leaned forward, urgency bleeding into his voice. "Emma hasn't spoken in 6 months. 6 months, Your Honor. The best trauma specialists in California have tried everything. But there's precedent for this. Successful cases in Washington, Arizona, and even in New York where—" "You want to bring a dog into my courtroom?" Judge Holloway interrupted, her tone flat and unreadable. She opened the folder and began scanning the documents. "During testimony, while a 3-year-old is on the witness stand." "Yes, Your Honor." "The defense will have a field day with this. They'll argue it's prejudicial, that it makes the witness appear more sympathetic to the jury, that it's a circus stunt designed to manipulate emotions." "I know," David's voice cracked slightly. "But without this, Emma won't testify at all. She can't. The medical reports are clear. Her selective mutism is so severe that traditional accommodations aren't enough. But her grandmother told Detective Martinez that Emma used to love dogs before the trauma. It's the one thing we haven't tried." Judge Holloway continued reading, her expression inscrutable. The silence stretched so long that David could hear the antique clock on the wall ticking, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally she looked up. "Tell me about this dog." Relief flooded through David's chest. She was considering it. "His name is Valor. He's a 4-year-old golden retriever, trained and certified by Canine Companions for Independence. He's been working with the Orange County Police Department for 2 years, primarily with traumatized children. Officer Jake Reynolds is his handler, exemplary record, 15 years on the force. Valor has been present during over 40 forensic interviews and has helped children feel safe enough to disclose abuse." "Has he ever been in a courtroom during testimony?" David hesitated. "No, Your Honor, this would be his first time, but the research shows." "Research is one thing, Mr. Kim. Reality is another." Judge Holloway leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "Do you understand what you're asking me to do? If I allow this and we get a conviction, the defense will appeal on grounds that the dog's presence was prejudicial. This could set back courthouse facility dog programs nationwide if we handle it wrong. And if we don't try, a dangerous man walks free and Emma Chen stays trapped in silence for the rest of her life." David's voice was raw now, all pretense of professional detachment gone. "Your Honor, I have a daughter, she's 5. When I look at Emma's case file, when I see what she witnessed, what she's been carrying alone inside her head for 6 months, I can't give up on her. I won't." Judge Holloway was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up Emma's photograph from the folder, the before picture, the one from the birthday party. She studied the smiling little girl in the pink princess dress, and something flickered across her stern features. Something that might have been pain or memory or both. "I had a granddaughter," she said quietly, "Sophia. She was 4 when she died in a car accident. That was 12 years ago." She set the photo down gently. "Emma looks like her. Same smile, same age." David's throat tightened. He'd never heard Judge Holloway speak about anything personal. "I became a judge because I believe in the law, Mr. Kim. I believe in procedure, in fairness, in the careful balance that keeps our justice system from descending into chaos." She looked up, and her eyes were steel. But I also became a judge because I believe that sometimes, very rarely but sometimes, we have to take a chance on mercy, on innovation, on doing something that seems crazy because it's the right thing to do. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad, beginning to write notes in her precise handwriting. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring Officer Reynolds and this dog Valor to my chambers in exactly 90 minutes. I want to meet them, assess the dog's temperament, and review the handler's credentials personally. Then I'm going to make a decision. David exhaled, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so. Don't thank me yet. Judge Holloway's expression hardened. If I allow this, it will be under strict conditions. The dog stays at the witness's feet, no interaction during testimony unless absolutely necessary. Defense counsel gets to voir dire the arrangement, and if at any point I determine this is prejudicial or disruptive, it ends immediately. Understood. Understood. One more thing, Mr. Kim. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. That little girl has been through hell. If we're going to do this, if we're going to ask her to relive trauma on a witness stand, then we'd better make damn sure it works. No half measures. No backup plans. We commit fully or we don't do it at all. David stood as well, clutching his briefcase. One chance, Your Honor. That's all we need. Just one chance. Judge Holloway looked at Emma's photograph one more time, her jaw set with determination. Then you'd better make it count, because in my courtroom we don't get second chances to protect children. Get out of here and find that dog. You've got 90 minutes. David practically ran from her chambers, his phone already in his hand, dialing Sarah Martinez. When she answered, he could barely contain the hope in his voice. She's considering it. Get Valor here. Now. The miracle had a chance. Officer Jake Reynolds was running a brush through Valor's golden coat when his phone rang at 7:43 a.m. He glanced at the caller ID, Detective Sarah Martinez, and his stomach dropped. They weren't supposed to meet until this afternoon, maybe not at all if the judge had already made her decision about Emma Chen's case. Martinez, we need you at the courthouse. Now. Judge Holloway is considering allowing Valor in the courtroom. You have 90 minutes to get there and convince her this will work. Jake's hand froze mid-brush. Valor looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes, sensing the sudden shift in his handler's energy. She's actually considering it. She wants to meet Valor personally. Jake, this is it. This is the shot we've been hopping for. Don't be late. The line went dead. Jake stood in his kitchen, his heart pounding, looking down at the dog who'd become more than just his work partner over the past 2 years. Valor had been there through Jake's divorce, through his father's death, through countless nights when the weight of this job felt unbearable. And more importantly, Valor had been there for 43 traumatized children who needed someone safe to hold onto while they told their stories. But this case was different. Emma Chen hadn't just been traumatized, she'd been silenced, completely, and if Valor couldn't reach her, no one could. Come on, buddy, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. We've got work to do, important work. Valor stood immediately, his tail wagging slightly. He knew that tone. It meant children who needed help. It meant being gentle and patient and present in a way that humans sometimes struggled to be. Jake grabbed Valor's official blue vest from the hook by the door, the one that read Courthouse Facility Dog in white letters. As he secured it around Valor's chest, he thought about all the training that had gone into creating this moment. Canine Companions for Independence had started working with Valor when he was just 8 weeks old. 2 years of socialization, obedience training, and specialized work teaching him to remain calm in stressful environments, to read human emotional cues, to provide comfort without being demanding or intrusive. Then Jake had spent another year working specifically with Valor on courthouse protocols, how to navigate metal detectors and crowded hallways, how to lie still during long testimonies, how to sense when a child needed him to move closer or when they needed space. how to be an anchor when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. They'd practiced in empty courtrooms with Jake playing different roles, the scared witness, the aggressive attorney, the stern judge. Valor had learned to ignore raised voices, sudden movements, crying, and even the occasional outburst. Nothing rattled him. But this would be his first real testimony. His first time on an actual witness stand with an actual traumatized child and actual stakes that could mean the difference between justice and failure. Jake loaded Valor into his truck, a Ford F-150 that had seen better days but ran reliably enough. As he drove toward downtown Santa Ana, his mind raced through everything that could go wrong. What if Valor sensed Jake's anxiety and became nervous himself? What if Emma was allergic to dogs? What if the judge took one look at them and decided this whole idea was ridiculous? Worse, what if Emma didn't respond at all? Traffic was mercifully light. Jake made it to the courthouse parking garage with 20 minutes to spare before the 90-minute deadline. He sat in the truck for a moment, both hands on the steering wheel, trying to steady his breathing. "Okay, listen to me," he said, turning to Valor in the passenger seat. The dog's ears perked up attentively. "There's a little girl in there who's been hurt. She's scared. She hasn't talked in a really long time, and everyone's counting on us to help her find her voice again. I need you to be the amazing dog I know you are. Can you do that?" Valor's tail thumped against the seat. Jake laughed despite his nerves. Of course, the dog couldn't understand the specifics, but something in his tone, in the energy of this moment, had communicated itself perfectly. They walked through the courthouse's side entrance, the one reserved for law enforcement and court personnel. The security guards knew Jake and Valor by sight now. They'd been coming here for 2 years. But today, everyone they passed seemed to look at them differently. Word had spread about what might happen in courtroom 4B. "Good luck, Officer Reynolds," called out Maria, the woman who ran the courthouse cafeteria. "We're all rooting for that little girl." Jake nodded his thanks, not trusting his voice to respond. The weight of collective hope was almost crushing. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where Judge Holloway's chambers were located. Sarah Martinez was already there, packing in the hallway like an expectant father in a maternity ward. When she saw them emerge from the elevator, relief flooded her face. "Thank God you made it." She knelt down immediately, greeting Valor with a gentle scratch behind his ears. "Hey there, beautiful boy. You ready to be a hero today?" Valor's tail wagged, and he licked her hand once, a gesture of affection he rarely showed to anyone outside of Jake and the children he worked with. Sarah had that effect on people and animals alike. Her genuine compassion radiated from every interaction. "Is she really going to let us try this?" Jake asked quietly. "She's considering it. But Jake, you have to understand, Judge Holloway is tough. She's going to test Valor, question everything, look for any reason why this might not work. You need to be confident but not cocky, professional but passionate. Show her that this isn't just some feel-good publicity stunt. Show her that Valor is a legitimate tool for justice." David Kim emerged from the judge's chambers, his tie slightly loosened, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. "She's ready for you, both of you." He looked down at Valor and something softened in his expression. "No pressure, buddy, but you're kind of our last hope here." Jake straightened his uniform, checked that Valor's vest was sitting properly, and took a deep breath. "We've got this. Right, Valor?" The dog looked up at him with absolute trust, absolute readiness. They walked into Judge Holloway's chambers together. The judge was sitting behind her desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a stack of papers spread before her. When she looked up and saw Valor, her stern expression flickered, just for a moment, into something that might have been wonder. "So this is the miracle worker," she said, standing and walking around her desk. She stopped a few feet away from Valor, observing him carefully. "He's beautiful." "Thank you, Your Honor. This is Valor. 4 years old, certified through Canine Companions for Independence, with over 300 hours of specialized training in trauma-informed support. Jake's voice was steady, professional, but his hand trembled slightly where it rested on Valor's head. Judge Holloway knelt down slowly, her eyes never leaving Valor's face. The dog remained perfectly still, his tail wagging gently but not excitedly. He understood, somehow, that this was an important moment requiring his best behavior. "May I?" the judge asked. "Of course." She extended her hand, and Valor sniffed it politely before allowing her to pet his head. For several long moments, Judge Holloway stroked the dog's soft fur, her expression distant, remembering something or someone. "My granddaughter Sophia loved dogs," she said quietly, "golden retrievers especially. We had promised her one for her 5th birthday." Her voice caught slightly. "She never made it to 5. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Valor's contented breathing. Judge Holloway stood, her professional mask sliding back into place, but her eyes were slightly red. "Officer Reynolds, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can Valor handle the stress of a courtroom? The raised voices, the tension, the unpredictability?" "Yes, Your Honor, absolutely." "What if Emma doesn't respond to him? What if 6 months of silence has damaged her too deeply for even a therapy dog to reach?" Jake met her gaze directly. "Then at least we'll know we tried everything. At least Emma will know that the adults in her life didn't give up on her. Sometimes, Your Honor, that knowledge alone can start the healing process." Judge Holloway nodded slowly. She looked at her watch. 8:47 a.m. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used in court. "You're going to take Valor to the witness waiting room where Emma and her grandmother are right now. No testimony, no pressure, just let Emma meet the dog. If she responds, if there's any indication this might work, then we proceed. If not—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Michelle Chen just texted. Emma had another episode this morning. She's non-responsive right now, completely dissociated. Michelle doesn't think Emma even understands where they are." Jake's heart sank. This was worse than he'd thought. But Judge Holloway straightened her shoulders, determination hardening her features. "Then I suggest you don't waste any more time. Officer Reynolds, take Valor to that little girl. Show me what miracles look like." Jake nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He turned toward the door, Valor walking perfectly beside him, their steps synchronized after years of working together. As they walked down the hallway toward the witness waiting room, Jake whispered one more prayer. "Please, God, please let this work. That little girl deserves her voice back." Behind them, he heard Judge Holloway say something to Sarah and David, her voice barely audible. "If this works, if that dog reaches her, it'll be the most important thing that's ever happened in my courtroom." They reached the door marked Witness Services, Room 3B. Jake's hand hovered over the handle. On the other side was Emma Chen, a 3-year-old child trapped in silence, carrying trauma that would break most adults. And beside Jake was Valor, a 4-year-old golden retriever who'd been trained for exactly this moment. Jake opened the door. Everything was about to change. The witness waiting room was painted a soft blue color that someone had probably thought would be calming. It wasn't. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over mismatched furniture donated by various community organizations. Children's books lay scattered on a low table, their bright covers a stark contrast to the heaviness that filled the space. Emma Chen sat in a small chair by the window, her body so still she could have been a photograph. Her dark hair hung limply around her face, and her eyes, those eyes that had once sparkled with joy in her birthday photos, stared at nothing. Her tiny hands lay motionless in her lap, and she didn't react when the door opened. She didn't react to anything anymore. Michelle Chen sat beside her granddaughter, one hand hovering protectively near Emma's shoulder but not quite touching. The elderly woman looked up when Jake and Valor entered, and the hope that flashed across her face was almost painful to witness. She'd been hopping for 6 months. How much hope could one person carry before it crushed them? Also in the room was Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, Emma's trauma therapist, who stood quickly when she saw the dog. Her expression was professionally neutral, but Jake could read the skepticism there. She'd tried everything with Emma. Why would a dog succeed where science had failed? And in the corner sat Maria Delgado, the victim advocate assigned to Emma's case, clutching a stress ball so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Mrs. Chen," Jake said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Officer Jake Reynolds. This is Valor. Judge Holloway has given us permission to see if Emma might respond to him." Michelle's eyes filled with tears. She hasn't moved in 2 hours. Since the nightmare this morning, she's been like this. I don't even know if she knows I'm here. Jake nodded, his heart aching. He'd seen dissociation before in traumatized children, the way they retreated so far into themselves that their bodies became empty shells, protective fortresses against a world that had proven too dangerous, too painful to inhabit. "May we approach?" he asked. "Please," Michelle whispered, "please try anything." Jake looked down at Valor, and in that moment of eye contact, years of training and trust passed between them. The dog understood. He always understood. They moved slowly across the room, not directly toward Emma. That would be too confrontational, too threatening for a traumatized child. Instead, Jake guided Valor to a spot about 6 feet away from Emma's chair, positioned so the little girl could see the dog in her peripheral vision without feeling cornered. Valor sat. His posture was relaxed but attentive, his golden tail curled around his haunches. He didn't stare at Emma. That would be predatory, wrong. Instead, he gazed gently at the space just to her left, present but not demanding, available but not intrusive. 1 minute passed, 2, 5. Emma didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge that anything in the room had changed. Jake felt his hope beginning to crack. He glanced at Dr. Okonkwo, whose expression said what everyone was thinking. This isn't going to work. 10 minutes, 12. Michelle Chen bit her lip so hard a tiny drop of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. Maria Delgado had tears streaming silently down her face. The stress ball in her hands had permanent indentations from her fingers. 15 minutes. Jake's legs were beginning to cramp from standing so still, but he didn't dare move. Valor remained perfectly positioned, a statue of patience and unconditional presence. This was what he'd been trained for, to simply be there, to exist as a safe, non-threatening constant while traumatized souls decided whether they could risk reaching out again. 17 minutes. Then something shifted. It was so subtle Jake almost missed it. Emma's right index finger twitched. Just once. A tiny movement that might have been nothing might have been everything. Valor's left ear rotated slightly, catching the movement. He didn't turn his head, didn't change his position, but Jake felt the dog's awareness sharpen. Valor had noticed too. Another minute crawled by. Then Emma's eyes moved. Just her eyes, not her head. They slid slowly to the left, where Valor sat bathed in the morning sunlight streaming through the window. The light caught his golden fur, making him glow like something magical, something not quite of this harsh world. Emma stared at the dog. Valor, with the impeccable instinct of a creature who'd spent years reading human emotion, turned his head slightly, not directly toward her but toward her general direction. His warm brown eyes held infinite patience, infinite gentleness. 20 minutes. Emma's breathing changed. It became slightly faster, less shallow. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward in her chair, professional detachment forgotten, watching with barely contained intensity. 22 minutes. Emma's hand lifted from her lap. The movement was slow, hesitant, as though her arm hadn't been used in years rather than hours. Her small fingers extended toward Valor, reaching across the space that separated them, the space between silence and voice, between trauma and healing, between being broken and beginning to mend. Valor didn't move toward her. He let her come to him at her own pace in her own time. This was Emma's choice, Emma's moment, Emma's first step back into a world where it was safe to reach out. Her fingertips touched the soft golden fur of his ear. The room held its collective breath. Emma's fingers curled into Valor's fur, gently, carefully, as though she was touching something precious and fragile. The dog remained absolutely still except for his tail, which gave one soft wag of encouragement. For a long moment, nothing else happened. Then Emma's body shifted. She leaned forward in her chair, drawn by something in this creature that spoke to a part of her that trauma hadn't destroyed. Her other hand came up, both hands now buried in Valor's soft coat. And then she did something no one had seen her do in 182 days. She leaned her head down and pressed her face into Valor's neck. Michelle Chen sobbed, a single, sharp sound of hope and heartbreak combined. Maria Delgado pressed her hand over her mouth. Dr. Okonkwo's eyes were suddenly wet behind her professional glasses. Jake barely dared to breathe. Valor sat perfectly still, letting this tiny broken child use him as an anchor, a safe harbor in a storm that had raged for half a year. And then from deep within Emma's chest, from a place where words had been locked away and buried and almost lost forever, came a sound, barely a whisper, quieter than breathing, but unmistakably, miraculously, a word. Doggy. The room shattered and reformed in that single instant. Michelle Chen's hand flew to her heart. Dr. Okonkwo stood so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Maria Delgado was openly weeping now. Emma pressed closer to Valor, her small voice coming again, slightly stronger this time, testing whether the world was safe enough for words, whether speaking would bring more pain or whether, maybe, it might bring comfort. Good doggy. Jake's vision blurred. In 15 years as a police officer, in 2 years working with Valor, in dozens of cases involving traumatized children, he had never felt anything like this moment. It was as though he was witnessing a resurrection, a soul climbing back from the underworld. Emma lifted her head slightly, looking at Valor's gentle face, her fingers still tangled in his fur. And then, in a voice that was small but clear, in words that carried the weight of 6 months of silence, she spoke directly to the dog who had somehow, impossibly, reached through her trauma and found her. You're a good doggy. You're a very good doggy. Valor's tail wagged. He leaned gently into Emma's embrace, and the 3-year-old child who hadn't spoken since August wrapped her thin arms around the golden retriever's neck and held on as though he was the only real thing left in the world. Because in that moment maybe he was. Outside the door, Detective Sarah Martinez and Prosecutor David Kim had been listening through the small window. They stood frozen, tears streaming down both their faces, watching the impossible become real. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands and texted Judge Holloway 4 words. She's speaking to him. In her chambers, Judge Patricia Holloway read the message, closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer of thanks to a granddaughter she'd lost 12 years ago. Then she stood, straightened her robes, and prepared to make history in courtroom 4B. The miracle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. For the next hour, the witness waiting room became a sacred space, where a miracle unfolded one whispered word at a time. Emma Chen remained pressed against Valor's side, her small fingers buried in his golden fur, as though the dog was a lifeline connecting her to a world she'd abandoned 6 months ago. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo moved slowly, carefully, positioning herself on the floor a few feet away from Emma and Valor. Her years of training had taught her how to be present without being intrusive, how to create space for healing without forcing it. She'd spent 6 months trying every therapeutic technique she knew to reach this child, and now She watched in awe as a 4-year-old golden retriever accomplished what science couldn't. "Emma," Dr. Okonkwo said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell the doggy your name?" Emma's grip on Valor's fur tightened. For a long moment nothing happened. Then so quietly they had to strain to hear, "Emma, my name is Emma." Michelle Chen's hand covered her mouth, muffling the sob that threatened to escape. She'd heard her granddaughter's name spoken in that precious voice 1,000 times before the silence, at breakfast, during bedtime stories, while playing with toys. But hearing it now, after 6 months of nothing, felt like hearing music after going deaf. "That's a beautiful name," Dr. Okonkwo continued, her professional training keeping her voice steady even as tears tracked down her cheeks. "The doggy's name is Valor. Can you say hello to Valor?" Emma turned her face toward the dog, her dark eyes meeting his gentle brown ones. "Hi, Valor," she whispered. "Hi." Valor's tail wagged once, slowly, and he shifted slightly so that Emma could lean more comfortably against him. The dog seemed to understand instinctively that every small movement mattered, that trust was being rebuilt one tiny gesture at a time. Jake Reynolds remained standing nearby, his role now reduced to simply being Valor's handler, letting the dog do the work he'd been trained for. But inside, Jake's heart was hammering. This was working. Against all odds, against 6 months of professional failure, against the crushing weight of trauma, this was actually working. Maria Delgado, the victim advocate, had positioned herself in the corner with a notebook and a recording device that had been approved by the court. Her job was to document everything Emma said, carefully, legally, in a way that could be used in court if Emma managed to testify. But her hands were shaking so badly she could barely write. "Emma," Dr. Okonkwo said after a few minutes of letting the child simply exist in Valor's presence, "you've been very quiet for a long time. I'm so glad you're talking to Valor. He's a very special dog." "He's soft," Emma whispered. "He's warm." "He is. He makes you feel safe, doesn't it?" Emma nodded against Valor's neck. The dog remained perfectly still, his breathing slow and even, a living meditation on patience and presence. "Emma, sweetheart," Dr. Okonkwo continued, choosing her words with extreme care, "do you remember why you're here today? Why you came to this building?" Emma's body tensed. Valor felt it immediately and leaned slightly more into her embrace, providing pressure and comfort. The dog's intuition was remarkable. He knew exactly when to offer more support. "The scary place," Emma whispered. Her voice had gone even quieter, retreating. "The courthouse doesn't have to be scary," Dr. Okonkwo said gently. "You're safe here. Valor is here. Your grandma is here. We're all here to keep you safe." Emma was quiet for several minutes. Michelle Chen wiped tears from her face with trembling hands, watching her granddaughter struggle with memories that should never have belonged to someone so young. Then, unprompted, Emma spoke again. Her words came out in a rush, as though once the dam had broken, the water had to flow. "There was a scary man at Grandma's house. He had a loud voice, so loud, and he was mad, so mad." Dr. Okonkwo's breath caught, but she kept her voice steady. "That must have been very frightening." "I hid it," Emma continued, her voice muffled against Valor's fur. "Under the table, like hide-and-seek, but it wasn't fun, it was scary." "You were very brave to hide," Dr. Okonkwo said. "Very, very brave." "There was red stuff," Emma whispered, and her small body began to shake. "On the floor, red like my crayons, but not crayons, it was everywhere." Michelle Chen had to leave the room. She stood quickly and stumbled toward the door, unable to watch her granddaughter relive the nightmare that had stolen her voice. Sarah Martinez, who'd been observing through the window, caught Michelle in the hallway and held her while she wept. Inside, Maria Delgado wrote furiously, documenting every word while tears dripped onto her notebook, smearing the ink. "Emma," Dr. Okonkwo said, her own voice thick with emotion now, You saw something that night that no little girl should ever have to see. But I want you to know something important. It wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault." Emma lifted her head slightly, looking at the therapist with eyes that held far too much understanding for a 3-year-old. Grandma was crying. She was crying so much. And the ambulance came with loud sirens. And the police. So many people. "Your grandma is okay," Dr. Okonkwo assured her. "She's safe. You're safe now." "But I wasn't okay," Emma said, and the simple truth of those words broke something in every adult in the room. I couldn't talk anymore. The words went away. Jake had to turn away, pressing his fist against his mouth to keep from making a sound. This child, this tiny, brave child, understood what had happened to her. She knew she'd lost her voice. She'd been aware of the silence, trapped inside it, unable to break free. "But you're talking now," Dr. Okonkwo said, tears streaming freely down her face now, professionalism abandoned in the face of this raw, beautiful breakthrough. "You found your words again. Valor helped you find them." Emma nodded and pressed her face back into Valor's neck. "Valor is magic," she whispered. "He made the scared go away, not all the way, but some." For the next 20 minutes, Emma continued to speak. The words came in fragments and pieces, in the disjointed way that traumatized children process and communicate horror. She told them about hiding under the table, about the terrible sounds, about seeing things through the table legs that would haunt her for the rest of her life, about being too scared to move, too scared to breathe, too scared to make any sound at all in case the scary man found her. And through it all, Valor remained her anchor. When the memories became too much and Emma started to retreat back into silence, she would bury her fingers deeper into his fur. And somehow, impossibly, the dog would lean into her just right, would adjust his position to provide more comfort, would remind her with his warm, solid presence that she wasn't alone in the darkness anymore. Dr. Okonkwo asked gentle questions, never pushing, always following Emma's lead. Maria Delgado documented everything. Jake Reynolds stood guard over them both, his hand resting lightly on Valor's back, feeling the dog's steady breathing, marveling at this creature who'd been trained to do exactly this, but somehow did it with a grace that transcended training. At 10:47 a.m. there was a soft knock on the door. David Kim entered quietly, his eyes red from crying. "Judge Holloway is ready," he said softly. "If Emma can testify, if she's willing to try, the courtroom is prepared." Everyone looked at Emma, the little girl who'd been silent for 6 months, who just spent an hour pouring out trauma and pain and memories that should have been impossible for someone so young to articulate. Emma looked up at Dr. Okonkwo, then at her grandmother who'd returned to the room, then down at Valor. Her small hand clutched the dog's fur like a talisman. "Will Valor come with me?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Jake knelt down beside them, his eyes level with Emma's. "If the judge says yes, if it's okay with everyone, Valor will be right there with you the whole time. He won't leave you, I promise." Emma considered this, her 3-year-old mind processing decisions that most adults would struggle with. Then she nodded just once. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try, but Valor has to come." "He will," Jake promised, his voice breaking. "He absolutely will." Dr. Okonkwo caught Jake's eye, and in that glance they communicated what they both knew. This was fragile. Emma had found her voice, yes, but trauma didn't disappear in an hour. The courtroom would be overwhelming. The formal setting, the strangers, the man who'd haunted her nightmares sitting just feet away. But they had something now they hadn't had before. They had Emma's words. They had her willingness to try. And they had a golden retriever named Valor who'd proven he could work miracles. David Kim stepped back into the hallway where Judge Holloway waited, her stern face etched with lines of tension and hope. "She'll testify," he said simply, "with the dog." Judge Holloway nodded once, her jaw set with determination. "Then let's make history, and God help us all if we do anything to harm that child further." Inside the witness room, Emma stood on shaky legs, her hand firmly gripping Valor's vest. Michelle Chen knelt beside her granddaughter, smoothing her hair, whispering words of love and encouragement. "You're the bravest girl in the whole world," Michelle said, her voice thick with emotion. "Braver than any princess, braver than any superhero. I'm so proud of you, Emma. So proud." Emma looked up at her grandmother, then down at Valor. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know, baby, but Valor will be right there. And Grandma will be in the room too, and you can stop anytime you need to." Emma took a deep breath, a big one, the kind that children take before jumping into a swimming pool or trying something new and frightening. "Okay," she said, "let's go." And with those two words, Emma Chen and Valor walked toward courtroom 4B, toward justice, toward healing, toward a moment that would change not just one trial, but the entire way America's legal system approached its most vulnerable witnesses. The walls had come down. Now came the hardest part. Courtroom 4B had never felt so heavy with anticipation. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Victims' advocates, off-duty police officers, courthouse staff who'd heard whispers of what might happen today. Even the court reporter, a woman named Helen who'd worked in this building for 31 years, found her hands shaking as she positioned them over her stenography machine. Judge Patricia Holloway sat at her bench, her black robe seeming more imposing than usual, her expression carved from stone. She'd spent the last 20 minutes reviewing case law from other jurisdictions, looking for precedent, for guidance, for anything that would help her make the right decision. The defense attorney, Marcus Wellington, sat at his table with his expensive suit and his confident smirk, already preparing his appeal arguments. His client, Jake, refused to even look at the man, sat beside him in a tie that was probably meant to make him look respectable. The prosecution table held David Kim and Sarah Martinez, both looking like they might shatter from tension. In the front row of the gallery sat Michelle Chen, flanked by Maria Delgado and Dr. Okonkwo, all three women holding hands so tightly their knuckles had gone white. The bailiff's voice cut through the silence. "All rise for Judge Holloway." Everyone stood, but Judge Holloway waved them down immediately. "Be seated." Her eyes swept the courtroom, landing on the side door where Jake Reynolds stood with Valor and Emma. "Bring in the witness." The room held its collective breath. Jake opened the door slowly. Emma appeared first, so tiny she barely reached his waist. She wore a simple blue dress that her grandmother had chosen, her dark hair pulled back with a small clip. In her right hand, she clutched Valor's vest with a grip that had turned her small knuckles white. The golden retriever walked beside her with perfect precision, his steps measured and calm, his presence radiating a steadiness that everyone in the courtroom could feel. Marcus Wellington shot to his feet immediately. "Your Honor, I must object in the strongest possible terms. The presence of a dog during witness testimony is highly prejudicial and—" "Mr. Wellington," Judge Holloway's voice could have frozen fire. "You'll have your opportunity to object on the record, but I'm telling you now that I've reviewed the relevant case law, and I'm prepared to allow this accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act and California Evidence Code Section 765. This witness has severe trauma-related mutism, and the courthouse facility dog is a reasonable accommodation to enable her testimony." "But Your Honor, a jury will see this child with a dog and immediately." "We don't have a jury yet, Mr. Wellington. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if the witness can testify at all. Now sit down." Wellington sat, but his jaw was clenched with barely contained fury. His client leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Wellington nodded, already planning his appeal. Judge Holloway's voice softened as she addressed Emma directly. "Hello, Emma. My name is Judge Holloway. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma nodded, pressing closer to Valor. "Can you use your words, sweetheart?" To tell what happened," Emma whispered, so quietly the microphones barely caught it. "That's right, and that's very brave of you. Now I see you have a special friend with you. Is that Valor?" "Yes." Emma's hand tightened on the dog's vest. "Would you like Valor to sit with you while you talk to us?" Another nod, more vigorous this time. Judge Holloway glanced at the bailiff. "Please escort the witness and the facility dog to the witness stand." What happened next had never occurred in this courtroom before. The bailiff, a burly man named Marcus who'd seen everything in his 20 years, approached Emma with unexpected gentleness. Jake helped Emma climb the 2 steps up to the witness stand area, which had been specially modified that morning with a lower chair appropriate for a 3-year-old. Valor climbed the steps beside Emma, his movements graceful despite the unusual setting. Once Emma was seated in the small chair, Valor positioned himself at her feet, lying down so his head rested on his paws, perfectly still except for his eyes, which remained locked on Emma's face. Emma's small hand immediately dropped down to rest on Valor's head, her fingers curling into the soft fur behind his ears. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine. "Let the record show that the witness is accompanied by a certified courthouse facility dog named Valor." David Kim stood slowly, approaching the witness stand with the caution of someone approaching a frightened bird. "Hi, Emma. My name is Mr. Kim. I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? If you need to take a break at any time, you just tell me." Emma nodded, both hands now buried in Valor's fur. "Emma, do you remember last summer, in August?" "Yes." Her voice was barely audible. "Can you tell us what happened on August 15th at your grandma's house?" Emma's breathing quickened. Valor felt the change immediately and lifted his head slightly, pressing against her leg. Emma looked down at him, drew strength from his presence, and began to speak. "I was playing with my dolls in the living room, and then the scary man came." "The scary man? Can you tell us more about him?" Emma's eyes flickered toward the defense table for just a second, then away. "He was tall and loud. He was yelling at Grandma, so loud it hurt my ears." Marcus Wellington started to rise, another objection forming, but Judge Holloway silenced him with a look that could have melted steel. "What happened next, Emma?" David Kim asked gently. "I got scared, so I hid under the kitchen table, like hide-and-seek, but I didn't want him to find me." "You hid under the table, and what did you see from under there?" Emma's small body began to tremble. Valor immediately shifted position, moving closer, providing more pressure and warmth. Emma leaned forward, pressing her face briefly into his fur, breathing in his comforting scent. Then she straightened, her hands gripping his vest like a lifeline. I saw his shoes, black shoes, and I saw him push Grandma. She fell down, and then there was a loud noise, like fireworks but scary, and Grandma was bleeding. There was so much red, it was everywhere." Michelle Chen's sob echoed through the silent courtroom. Maria Delgado wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "And the man with the black shoes," David Kim continued, his own voice thick with emotion, "is he in this room right now?" Emma didn't want to look. Every instinct in her 3-year-old body screamed at her to hide, to go back into the silence where the scary memories couldn't reach her. But Valor was there, warm and solid and real beneath her hands, and somehow that was enough. She looked up. Her eyes scanned the courtroom. They landed on the defense table, on the man in the tie who'd haunted her nightmares for 6 months. "Him," she whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. "That's the scary man." The courtroom erupted in barely contained emotion. Judge Holloway's eyes were suspiciously bright as she called for order. The court reporter's tears dripped onto her machine. Sarah Martinez gripped David Kim's arm so hard she'd leave bruises. For the next 12 minutes, Emma Chen testified. She answered questions about what she saw, what she heard, what she remembered from that terrible night. Her voice was small but clear, her words simple but devastating. And through every moment, Valor remained at her feet, a golden anchor in a storm of trauma and justice. When Marcus Wellington's turn came for cross-examination, he approached with extreme caution. Even he understood that attacking a 3-year-old witness with a therapy dog would destroy any sympathy his client might have had. "Emma," he said, his voice artificially gentle, "you were very scared that night, weren't you?" "Yes. And when people are scared, sometimes they remember things wrong. Isn't that possible?" Emma looked confused. I remember everything." "But you were hiding under a table. It was probably dark." "I saw him," Emma interrupted, her voice stronger now, almost fierce. "I saw the scary man, I saw what he did, and I won't forget, never ever." Wellington had no response to that. He glanced at his client, at Judge Holloway's warning expression, and wisely sat down. Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Emma, you've been very brave today. Very, very brave. Thank you for telling us the truth." Emma nodded, exhausted, her entire small body sagging with the weight of what she'd just done. "Can I go to Grandma now?" "Yes, sweetheart, you can go to Grandma." Jake Reynolds appeared at the witness stand, helping Emma down the steps. Valor rose gracefully and walked beside her, and the moment Emma's feet touched the courtroom floor, she broke into a run, straight into Michelle Chen's arms. The courtroom watched as grandmother and granddaughter held each other, both crying, both healing, both knowing that the worst was over. They'd faced the scary man together. They'd spoken the truth. They'd survived. Judge Holloway's gavel came down softly. "This court finds that the witness is competent to testify. We'll reconvene for trial in 30 days. She paused, her voice cracking slightly. "And I want it noted for the record that today this courtroom witnessed something extraordinary. A child found her voice. Justice found its way. And we all learned that sometimes miracles come with 4 legs and a golden coat." As people filed out, as lawyers packed their briefcases, as the machinery of justice ground forward toward trial, one truth remained. Everything had changed. And there was no going back. The trial lasted 6 days. 6 days of testimony, evidence, and legal arguments that would determine whether justice would be served or denied. But everyone who'd been in courtroom 4B knew the case had really been decided in those 15 minutes when a 3-year-old girl, with her hand buried in a golden retriever's fur, had looked her attacker in the eye and said, "That's the scary man." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned to the courtroom at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, their faces told the story before the foreman spoke a single word. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Michelle Chen collapsed in her seat, 23 years of tension releasing in a single sob. Emma, who'd been coloring quietly in the victim services room with Valor beside her, looked up when her grandmother burst through the door, and somehow, without being told, understood that the scary man wouldn't hurt anyone ever again. But the verdict was only the beginning of the story. Within hours, news of Emma's testimony had spread beyond Orange County. A reporter for the Los Angeles Times had been in the courtroom that day, and her article, "3-year-old finds her voice with help from courthouse dog," went viral before the sun set. By morning, it had been picked up by the Associated Press, CNN, NBC, and every major news outlet in the country. The video that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Emma's grandmother, after much consideration and consultation with Dr. Okonkwo and victim advocates, had authorized the release of carefully edited footage from the courtroom. Not Emma's testimony, that remained sealed, protected, but the moment when she first entered courtroom 4B, her tiny hand gripping Valor's vest, the dog walking beside her with such perfect steadiness that even hardened journalists wept when they saw it. The footage lasted only 47 seconds, but it shattered hearts across America. Morning show hosts choked up while discussing it. Senators shared it on social media. Police departments from Maine to Hawaii called Orange County asking how they could start their own courthouse facility dog programs. Jake Reynolds' phone rang constantly for weeks. He did interviews with Good Morning America, NPR, and 60 Minutes. In every interview, he deflected attention from himself to Valor, to Emma, to the need for more resources to help traumatized children navigate the justice system. "This isn't about one dog or one case," he told Anderson Cooper during a primetime special. "This is about recognizing that our legal system, as important as it is, can be terrifying for victims, especially child victims. We need to meet them where they are, give them the support they need to tell their stories. Valor did that for Emma, but there are thousands of children out there who need their own valor." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 3 weeks, Canine Companions for Independence reported a 400% increase in applications for their courthouse facility dog program. Donations poured in from across the country, small amounts from retirees living on fixed incomes, large checks from corporations and celebrities who'd been moved by Emma's story. 2 months after the verdict, California State Senator Rebecca Huang introduced the Emma's Voice Act, legislation that would fund courthouse facility dog programs in every California county and establish protocols for their use in criminal proceedings. The bill passed both houses with overwhelming bipartisan support, something that seemed impossible in the polarized political climate of 2025. "When I watched that video of Emma walking into court with Valor," Senator Huang said during the signing ceremony, "I thought about my own daughter. I thought about how terrifying it would be for a child to testify, and I knew we had to do better. Emma's courage showed us the way." But California was just the beginning. By the end of 2025, 17 states had passed similar legislation. Arizona, Washington, Texas, Florida, New York, states that agreed on almost nothing else found common ground in protecting traumatized witnesses. The momentum was unstoppable. Organizations that had been fighting for courthouse facility dog programs for years suddenly found doors opening that had been closed before. The National District Attorneys Association updated their training materials to include protocols for working with facility dogs. The American Bar Association published guidelines for defense attorneys, addressing concerns about prejudice while acknowledging the legitimate therapeutic need. Not everyone was supportive. Some defense attorneys argued that the presence of dogs created unfair emotional bias. Appeals courts in 3 states heard challenges to convictions obtained with facility dog testimony. But in case after case, the rulings came back the same. When properly implemented, with clear protocols and judicial oversight, courthouse facility dogs were a legitimate accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The legal precedent Emma's case established rippled through courtrooms across America. In Boston, a 7-year-old boy testified about abuse with a black Labrador named Justice beside him. In Seattle, a teenage trafficking survivor found her voice with the help of a golden retriever named Hope. In Miami, in Phoenix, in Denver, the stories multiplied, each one a testament to what Emma and Valor had started. By January 2026, just 18 months after Emma's testimony, there were 247 certified courthouse facility dogs working in 43 states. The waiting list for training programs stretched 2 years. Law schools began offering courses on trauma-informed prosecution. Police academies updated their curricula to include training on working with facility dogs during forensic interviews. The American Academy of Pediatrics published research showing that child witnesses who testified with facility dogs present showed significantly lower levels of post-traumatic stress compared to those who testified without such support. The data was compelling, undeniable. Emma's courage hadn't just won one case, it had changed the science of trauma recovery. Major news networks produced documentaries. Emma's story was featured in Time magazine's 100 Most Influential Cases of the Decade. Legal scholars wrote papers analyzing the intersection of therapeutic jurisprudence and victims' rights, citing Emma Chen v. California as the turning point. But perhaps the most meaningful impact happened in quieter ways. In small courtrooms across America, traumatized children who'd been told they'd have to face their abusers alone learned they could have a furry friend beside them. Prosecutors who'd struggled with cases involving child witnesses suddenly had a tool that actually worked. Judges who'd worried about re-traumatizing victims found a way to balance justice with compassion. Emma's grandmother received letters, thousands of them, from families whose children had been helped by courthouse facility dogs. Parents writing to say, "Your granddaughter gave my daughter the courage to speak." Prosecutors thanking Emma for showing them a better way. Even a few defense attorneys, grudgingly admitting that justice was better served when witnesses could actually testify rather than being silenced by trauma. Michelle Chen kept every letter in boxes in her garage. Sometimes, when Emma was asleep, she'd read through them and weep, not from sadness anymore, but from overwhelming gratitude that something so terrible had led to something so beautiful. The scary man was sentenced to 25 years to life. He would die in prison, his appeals exhausted, his name forgotten by everyone except those he'd hurt. But Emma's name and valors would be remembered forever. Not as victims, but as the child and dog who changed everything. 5 years felt like both a lifetime and a single heartbeat. Emma Chen stood in the gymnasium of Lincoln Elementary School on a bright April morning, clutching a poster board she decorated herself. The banner across the top read, "My Hero," Valor in careful 8-year-old handwriting, surrounded by drawings of golden dogs and colorful hearts. Today was career day, and Emma had asked for something special, something that had required permission from the principal, the school board, and one retired police officer who'd cried when he received her handwritten invitation. "Class, we have a very special presentation today," Mrs. Rodriguez announced to the assembled third graders. "Emma Chen is going to tell us about someone who changed her life." Emma walked to the front of the gym, her steps confident in a way that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. She wore a yellow ribbon pinned to her shirt, the official color of courthouse facility dog programs nationwide. Behind her walked Officer Jake Reynolds, now retired from active duty but still working as a trainer for new facility dog handlers. And beside Jake, moving more slowly than he once did, was Valor. The golden retriever's muzzle was almost entirely white now. At 9 years old, he'd officially retired from courthouse work 2 years ago, but his gentle brown eyes still held that same infinite patience, that same capacity for unconditional love. When he saw Emma, his tail wagged, slower than it once had, but no less enthusiastic. "Hi, Valor," Emma said, kneeling down to hug him. The dog leaned into her embrace, and for a moment everyone in the gym could see what they'd once been to each other, a traumatized child and a healing presence, two souls who'd found each other in the darkest moment. Emma stood and addressed her classmates, her voice clear and strong. "When I was 3 years old, something really scary happened to me. It was so scary that I stopped talking. For 6 whole months I didn't say a single word." The third graders stared, unable to imagine their chatty, confident classmate being silent for even a day. "The doctors tried to help me. My grandma tried to help me, but I was stuck. The scary feelings were too big and I couldn't find my words." Emma glanced at her poster board, at the pictures she'd drawn of a little girl hiding under a table. "Then I met Valor." She told them the story. Not all of it, she was 8 and some details would wait until she was older, but enough. She told them about touching Valor's soft ear, about whispering "good doggy," about how the dog had made her feel safe enough to speak again. "Valor helped me tell the truth," Emma said. "He helped me be brave when I thought I couldn't be, and because of him, a bad man went to jail and couldn't hurt anyone else." Jake Reynolds stood to the side, his eyes glistening. He'd heard Emma tell this story before. She'd become something of a spokesperson for courthouse facility dog programs, speaking at conferences and fundraisers with Michelle's careful oversight. But it never got easier. The pride he felt was overwhelming. "But that's not the end of the story," Emma continued, her voice rising with excitement. Because after Valor helped me, people all over America decided that other kids needed dogs like Valor too. Now there are hundreds of special dogs who help kids in courtrooms, and it all started because Valor believed in me. She pulled out her phone, carefully supervised by her grandmother, only for educational purposes, and showed a slideshow she'd created. Pictures of courthouse facility dogs from across the country. Golden retrievers, Labradors, poodles, all wearing their official vests, all providing comfort to traumatized witnesses. "When I grow up," Emma announced, "I'm going to train therapy dogs. I'm going to help other kids find their voices, just like Valor helped me find mine." The gymnasium erupted in applause. Emma's classmates clapped and cheered. Teachers wiped tears from their eyes. And in the back of the gym, 3 special guests watched with profound emotion. Judge Patricia Holloway had taken a personal day to attend. The stern woman who'd presided over Emma's case now served on the board of the California Courthouse Facility Dog Association, using her legal expertise to help expand programs statewide. She thought often of her granddaughter Sophia, wondering if she'd have grown up to be as brave as Emma. Detective Sarah Martinez, now a sergeant, had helped write the protocols that law enforcement agencies across California used when working with facility dogs. Emma's case had defined her career in ways she never could have imagined. And Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, still Emma's therapist though their sessions were down to once a month now, marveled at the transformation. The silent, traumatized toddler had become an articulate, passionate child advocate. The healing was real. The miracle had lasted. After Emma's presentation, she invited her classmates to meet Valor, under strict supervision, with Jake explaining proper etiquette around working dogs. The children approached with reverence, gently petting the retired facility dog, asking questions about his training and his work. One little boy, quieter than the others, hung back. Emma noticed and approached him. "Do you want to pet Valor?" she asked gently. The boy shook his head. "I'm scared of dogs," he whispered. Emma understood that fear, the fear that kept you frozen, the fear that stole your voice. She knelt down beside him. "That's okay. You don't have to pet him, but can I tell you a secret?" The boy nodded. "I was scared too. Of lots of things, but Valor taught me that sometimes the things we're scared of can become the things that save us. You don't have to pet him today, but maybe someday you'll be ready, and when you are, there will be a dog like Valor waiting for you." The boy considered this, then slowly extended his hand. Valor, with the intuition that had made him legendary, sat perfectly still and let the child touch his head. Just once, just enough. As the event concluded, as children filed back to their classrooms chattering about the amazing dog they'd met, Emma stood with her heroes, Jake, Valor, her grandmother Michelle, and the 3 women who'd helped save her life. "You did good today, kiddo," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "We all did," Emma replied, her hand resting on Valor's graying head. "We all did good." Judge Holloway stepped forward, something she'd been carrying in her purse for weeks. "Emma, I have something for you." She pulled out a frame containing a photograph. The moment Emma had first walked into courtroom 4B, her hand on Valor's vest, taking that impossible, courageous step toward justice. "This photo changed everything," Judge Holloway said. "It changed how our courts treat traumatized witnesses. It changed laws in 43 states. It helped thousands of children find their voices. But mostly, it reminds me that sometimes the bravest people are the smallest ones." Emma hugged the frame to her chest, tears sliding down her 8-year-old cheeks, happy tears, healing tears. Michelle Chen watched her granddaughter and felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years, complete peace. The nightmares had stopped. The therapy had worked. Her baby girl wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, leading, inspiring. As everyone prepared to leave, Emma knelt one more time beside Valor. The old dog looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold memories of that day, of the miracle they'd created together. "Thank you," Emma whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "Thank you for teaching me to be brave. Thank you for giving me my voice back. Thank you for being magic." Valor's tail thumped against the gymnasium floor, slower, gentler, but filled with the same love he'd shown her 5 years ago. And in that moment, everyone present understood the profound truth. One 3-year-old girl and one 4-year-old dog had changed the world, not through grand gestures or political power, but through simple courage, through showing up, through refusing to let trauma win. The ripples continued spreading outward. Every child who testified with a facility dog beside them, every prosecutor who learned trauma-informed techniques, every judge who made accommodations for vulnerable witnesses, every law that was passed, every program that was funded, every family that found hope. All of it traced back to a witness room where a broken child had whispered, "Good doggy," and a golden retriever had reminded her that she wasn't alone. Emma Chen walked out of Lincoln Elementary that day with her head held high, her future bright, her voice strong and clear. The scared little girl who'd hidden under the table was gone. In her place stood a survivor, an advocate, a beacon of hope for countless others still searching for their own voices in the darkness. And somewhere in that gymnasium, in the lingering warmth where miracles had been remembered and celebrated, you could almost hear the echo of something beautiful. Everything had changed when a 3-year-old spoke to a police dog in court. And the world would never be the same. The end.